Uh, as I said with the doctors, they may join us. I didn't hear any messages from them this morning, so sometimes they're busy with some other fires, especially with these wildfire involvement that they have. But the recap from last week, there's still strong evidence from the medical world that it's a vascular disease, that the COVID-19 uh, originally was a respiratory disease, but now they're more concerned that it's vascular in nature and it affects other organs. And the statistics, government wise, as I said before, the provincial government's only interested in COVID deaths as a data now. And Dr. McKinney shared that in 1 year from 2022 to 2023, there is statistically more deaths in our province than a year ago. So COVID is still there, and I'm hearing from teachers moving around and that the COVID is in our communities as well. There is evidence of that, positive news. The news is saying there's some positive cases. Larange was reporting some,
Some
and
still don't know.
the long term effects, I guess, are still the unknowns. The long COVID, people are complaining about the energy loss and the brain fog we've heard before, but these are, and even friends of ours still have the respiratory hangover, I guess, from the Delta virus way back then. So it's the other part that they were cautioning us is ticks, Lyme disease, and the issue of climate change affecting migratory, I guess, areas that may have not brought these type of insects in our area, but something to keep an eye on in our communities, and also lessons to our public and families on how to deal with ticks. So those are the advice that we had from last week, and they're involved in the wildfire meetings, the MHO, and also the doctors, because it's affecting health services and the mandatory evacuations that were being declared. They were all involved at these meetings. So that was the update we had from last week, just to give you guys from Dr. McKinney and Dr. Sobel's perspective. But a lot of the action is happening in our communities. I'd like to start off with Candace today, just to give us an update on where you're at and what you see and recommendations for our communities.
Oh God. Well, right now, River is on its third evacuation. We had evacuated May 14th, our priority 1 and 2 people with chronic health issues. And on May, a week later, we had to evacuate everyone because the threat of fire to the community. And there was a bit of confusion on that because SPSA said that 15 kilometers from the community, that's a threat to community. But we're now at 6 kilometers from the community and it's not a threat to the community. So they keep changing things. Getting proper, I remember in 2015 getting really good detailed accounts from SPSA on the fire situations. We had twice daily updates scheduled and it was complete, right? All the agencies, all the services. Now we've actually with MLTC, Daryl Wright had set up interagency meetings, Red Cross, SPSA, and the different community leaderships and emergency management teams. And we actually, and NIFA, Patrick Hassler was along with us to give us the health, public health perspective with the smoke, which was very helpful. And we actually had to put in a huge complaint and go to Marlo Pritchard to demand that we get proper information on these calls because we weren't getting it and it was like pulling teeth. So since that time, that has improved somewhat. We are getting better details. so that we can help, it helps us to make decisions on whether we have to move people or not. Being on those calls has been very helpful too, in terms of, once you've learned the ropes and what things, make a necessary evacuation, you kind of don't have to learn that again. So we've also learned to read a lot of maps and things like that, and have access to some of those resources we didn't have before. So at one point, every community in the Northwest region, except Beauval and La Planche, were evacuated.
Yeah.
And that was serious. We did have some news reporters come to English River during our evacuation time and check with us how we were doing. Evacuation and working with Red Cross is not an easy thing. People have an expectation of Red Cross that they're gonna, really look after you. And what we found out with English River on our evacuation was the Red Cross procedure and process is so slow and confusing for people that even though we pre-registered, filled in half the forms of each individual that was being registered, it did not speed things up. And then people think they're going to, there's expectations from people too that they're going to get, spending money, and that's not happening. And a lot of our people are going through snack withdrawal. So, the pop, the chips, and all those things that they regularly access at home are not accessible. So, but evacuation, we had an issue with Red Cross with the ERFN evacuation. When it was going so slowly, Daryl Wright asked if SPSA could come in and help register people. And Red Cross got upset and left and just abandoned us. So half of our people were registered, half of our people were not. And it caused a huge amount of confusion. And MLTC had to pick up a lot of costs, which are recoverable, but it was not a good situation. We are now on, as of yesterday, on our third evacuation, and we were in Cold Lake, and we have invited Red Cross, and people are getting their eyes opened again because they're not getting funding like they thought they would, because it's based on needs assessment. Snacks, cigarettes, things like that are not a need. Unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of miserable people, miserable kids, because they're going to go through withdrawals under a stressful time as it is. So we're going, it's constantly with evacuations, putting out human fires as well, between the agencies and the people, people with addictions, people with mental health issues. We had to mobilize huge numbers of our staff from the communities to go and assist. We had to create security. We actually had a missing person once from our evacuation. Ticks. Our youth are not accustomed of watching for ticks. They were out walking in prairie grasses and so forth, and that became an issue. Communicable diseases. Everybody thought they were getting food poisoning, but it wasn't food poisoning, it was the flu. Elders' food had to be, we had to ask other agencies to come help feed us because they couldn't handle spicy foods from the caterers, and some of them just quit eating. So, there's all kinds of issues. This time, for the most part, he sent us to Cold Lake because Hotel Dene does make allowances for traditional foods. They have their own security. They have laundry facilities. Laundry, one doesn't think of these things, but laundry was a huge issue when we were evacuated to North Battleford. It was just massive. One thing that did work well was access to home care services for people. That worked very well. And MLTC had mobilized a bunch of people from their teams, crisis teams, to assist us over there, which was really welcome. But what works is when, we learn a lot as communities too, on those interagency meetings like this one, is, sharing information, access to where we can get more equipment. That is something in the north we need. I mean, you and I have had initial discussions on that, Rick. But Saskatchewan First Nations Emergency Management had accessed some equipment and have distributed it to various of these northern communities that needed it, because quite frankly, SPSA does not have enough equipment in these type of fire situations where fires are everywhere. A lot of communities lost a lot of traditional cabins in these fires. Our community is lost too, but 3 members of our band had to fight the fire themselves at Knee Lake. SPSA did get there kind of just before the fires came and did give them sprinkler units, but the pump broke down and 1 cabin was lost. Fortunately, they were able to spare the other cabins in the church. So, and 1 cabin got lost on the Key Lake roadside before we could even ask for assistance. So I think the fire popped up there too soon for us to get mobilized on that. And that's the other thing though, that Key Lake Road, we have members and the band itself have cabins on the Key Lake Road, both sides of the road. Well, we thought that was all in the Larange district according to maps, but it's not in the Larange district. West side of the road is actually Isle Cross. East side of the road is actually the Larange. So getting that straight and getting the information to the right fire cache about where cabins are, etc., has been a long process because they passed the buck a bit. Quite frankly, I think SPSA is understaffed in this region, at least, because from Patrick Hessler's view, he sits on the meetings with the other 2 regions, Lac La Ronge Band and Peter Ballantyne. And they're getting the kinds of reports that I said we were getting in 2015. And we weren't. ISK has been very helpful in terms of the representative that we have from ISK in terms of letting us know what are recoverable costs. Our air purifiers, we had initially had 50 from my original purchase during COVID. We now have about 120. We have purchased extra and have found a way through our emergency recovery and response to cover the cost of those, even though we can't directly call it a cost because it's going into individual homes. We can recover it from administration fees that we have to charge. So that has been helpful. They have worked quite well, I would say, for I don't know how exactly SHA regional health would prioritize people, but on ours, priority ones are COPD, asthma, cardiac. Those ones, it works good when the smoke is moderate, but it's not good enough when the smoke is extreme for an extended period. for P2s who are, you know, other like young children, pregnant women, minor asthmatics, it works fine, even with the extreme extended periods. So they're well worth getting. And we're actually, the band is pushing the tribal council and ISK to make it something that is accessible to every household. But that could take time.
Yeah.
We have recommended other communities try and do it. We're doing that information sharing. Once one community finds out about something, it's good to share it with others. But it has been exhausting, almost more exhausting than COVID was. There's been days I haven't gone to bed till 1 o'clock in the morning because I'm still working on things and reporting. And one of the things going forward is we need to build bigger teams. We need to have that alternate person who can step into your role so you can get a break. And that's throughout the whole team, throughout the whole ICS team. That's necessary, but finding people with the right skills is in communities of limited size and people skills makes that a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Like I haven't had a day off in a month.
No, you've been busy. Third
On
evacuation.
top of that, I got to plant community
Really?
garden. On top of that, I have to plant my garden, community garden. I'm still planting. It's the middle of June.
And on the
Yeah,
COVID
mine
side,
is a little bit more because we have 2 communities.
have you haven't heard reports from the COVID you said, from NIFA orphan communities?
We're not seeing deaths from, like, NIFA hasn't reported any deaths. We meet with NIFA once a month now, only on the COVID scene, but there's no deaths being reported and the numbers are very low. The other respiratory diseases were higher. So they're actually thinking of stopping, they're considering stopping having monthly meetings as well. But there is COVID in the region. I know there was some reports of COVID in Dillon, probably picked that up during evacuation.
Yes.
So
Yeah, people are still moving around aside from the evacuation. I was in Edmonton and people showed up there for a big country concert. So all these major events are happening. So hang on tight is what the doctors had told us. It's not gone away. It's just they just declared it an endemic, but it's still raising havoc in our bodies and in our communities.
yeah. Oh, and I found out the KN95 masks work pretty good for the smoke.
The
I've had to be
K95?
outside for I've had to be outside for several hours in this smoke, and I've been wearing the KN95 masks when I do, and I have no sore throats, and the smoke was bad the last 2 days, and that's when I was planting. So
Well,
they work fairly well.
blessings to your garden as well. So,
Thanks.
Barb, you said you had no microphone over there. Is that sign language today?
Can you hear me now? I've
Yeah,
been playing.
Yeah.
There you are.
Woohoo! I'm not very tech savvy. I just pushed a bunch of buttons and everything else.
Well, let's flip over to you. And Buffalo has been impacted big time with the Shaw fire, and also impacted from other communities coming through your area. So
Yes, so my apologies. I've been kind of MIA for a bit. I was helping Meloche with the first set of evacuations. And then Buffalo's just came up so suddenly during that power outage, and there was absolutely no warning that it jumped the highway and became a threat to the community. So we were out there trying to notify people in the middle of a power outage that we were trying to do an evacuation. So I wish I would have known about those masks, because we were doing door knocks with elders and at the seniors units and trying to get people on buses. And after about a week and a half of that, I ended up with a chest infection from all of the smoke. So then I was off for a bit. But we haven't had any AMO meetings, because then the fire moved on to threaten Alacross. And now it's carried on and made its way to English River. So yeah, the Shaw fire is just giving everybody in the Northwest some grief. But as far as I know, everybody's back now. I think Buffalo River just started making its way home too. So Alacross, like everywhere north of Alacross, I think is back now. But yeah, like Candace said, everybody was kind of evacuated at the same time. We had La Loche, Turner, Buffalo, Dillon, Alacross did their short evacuation. But yeah, I don't know. I've never seen a fire threat to Buffalo, and yeah, it was an eye opener that bridge doesn't really save us after the discussions with SPSA, because the north side were so swampy that during those 2015 fires, all we had to worry about was smoke, because the fires from the north weren't getting past those natural guards. But yeah, it was definitely experience. And like Candace says, there could have been a lot more planning, a lot more preparation, a lot more communication with the communities. And yeah, like I said, a lot more planning, especially trying to coordinate something like that in the midst of a power outage, was pretty challenging. But we made it through, and yeah, I just got back from Saskatoon yesterday, and the smoke is everywhere. The smoke was as thick in Saskatoon as it was when I left Buffalo. So, but as far as I know, I was asking Candace about the purple air monitors. They've been installed in all the northern communities, so everybody can see where those ranges are in terms of smoke, whether it's low, medium, or high.
All medium right now.
Yeah. So yeah, I know some days like 300 was a high. Buffalo and Alacross. I haven't seen English Rivers yet, but with
At
Buffalo
one
and
point,
Alacross, we were hitting 420, 440, and 300 was considered high. So lots of just local talk that with people I know, lots of people going in for breathing issues or sore throats and signs of smoke inhalation. But now that there's been more education on it, I think that's declining. Lots of air traffic here. Air support is out. Like the tanker base had 5 or 6 bombers there, and there was about 10 helicopters out there still on the weekends. So like Candace says, it's just a matter of the air being clear enough for them to fly.
Yeah. At one point in English River, for one night, it was over 600 all night. Mm-hmm. That was the air quality, well over 600. Like we had only in the community at that time, we had 60 people volunteering to defend the community because it was a fire threat at that time. And they could only go out for about 20 minutes at a time and then have to go back to the clean air shelter.
Yeah.
To get away from it. And it was rough. It was really rough. And that extended period does take a toll.
And yeah, and in terms of, it does, and in terms of losses, I don't know what the total count is. Like, I'm not sure if Dillon and La Loche lost any cabins along the way.
Yeah, they did.
SPSA is not reporting numbers. They're not reporting numbers on confirmed losses yet, but from a local perspective, Buffalo Narrows was up to 16
I
losses.
think there was over 20 with Dylan, and there were several with loss. We've lost 2 so far.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see what numbers are reported.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was 16 from Buffalo alone, so I'd think like 20 would be below when we look at especially Dillon, because there's so many, like that whole Dillon area, Dillon to Buffalo, right? And that
Well,
from
yeah,
that,
and there was like, that was another thing with that. You know, there's people that live in houses that are not in the community year round. And SPSA was not considering those houses, and they weren't making them a priority.
yeah,
So that was, so what Buffalo River did was they went and got sprinklers, etc., from Sask Emergency First Nations Emergency Management, and they sprinkled them and they looked after it.
yeah, and I think that was kind of the same here, because I know like everybody who had a cabin, or like even the ones that were closer to town, were out there protecting their own. One family was away, and his house is maybe 4 kilometers from the airport. And so just a bunch of local boys geared up and found a bobcat and went out there and saved his house. So
That was, you know, another thing too with the fire guards. They won't put in a fire guard unless the fire is imminent. Like, I had to push and push and push. There was a former fire guard from 2015 fires in Patchnak. And I pushed and they came and cleared those, but I said, we have a new subdivision across the river. We need it, because it's going to hit it first if it comes. Well, they kept saying, well, we're done. Well, finally, it's like almost at the doorstep, and they come back, and I said, now, and like they actually almost accused me of lying. That wasn't done. I said, you take those guys from the crews and show them where that fire guard needs to be. Well, sure enough, it wasn't done. So they spent another 4 days building fire guards after that. But say, for instance, my community, I've got no protection, and I'm surrounded by oak growth. Nothing here. Nothing at all. And we don't have fire suppression. We got 1 fire truck. That's the only piece of equipment we have, with 1 operator. You know, it's those are the things we have to plan for and get better at. But one good thing I saw was that interjurisdictional line between First Nations and their neighboring communities dropped them. They just dropped them, and they're working together. Like, our band is covering everything for the hamlet of Patchnak. We'll bill them later.
Okay.
But they're covered with everything, treated exactly the same. And the same thing happened with Dillon, Michelle Village, and St. George's Hill.
That's good news.
That was, yeah.
I actually saw, Candace, the security guards from English River who were on evacuation and saved an elderly couple from a house fire in Battleford. So
Yeah,
just
that was pretty cool.
how resilient and caring the North are, right? They're dealing with their own stuff, and now they moved on to cities and decided to save people there. So kudos to them.
Well, they were being Sonzy, you know. But one of them is, but what?
See, sometimes
One of them is a
that's good.
Yeah, sometimes Sonzy is a good thing, and there was nobody giving them at 4 o'clock in the morning. That was so. Yeah, they went and checked it out, and it was a good thing they did. And one of them is just recently trained as a first responder.
Yeah,
He went
no,
in and got her.
that was such a good news story, especially after seeing, the complaints of the people who were evacuated, some of the complaints from the hotel, and some of the messages that had to be sent to communities through social media. It was nice to see a good news story like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we tried to look after our own, putting on security, because we did have problem people. This time we're saying that some of those same people are in those are in this evacuation as well, and we're telling them 0 tolerance. You screw up, you had your warning in the other evacuation. You screw up, you're on your own, and you can make your way home.
I was just gonna ask Barb, just in the midst of that power outage and the evacuation coming in, what would you recommend on how we deal with a power outage in that kind of emergency?
I'd recommend upgrades so we don't get them that long. I don't know, maybe we need to look at bigger generators, or I don't know. Like I said, that power outage alone was huge, right?
We topped up all of our
I
generator fuels.
I mean, we had a generator going at the local hall, and SPSA had brought in the air scrubbers. But like I said, everything just kind of happened so fast with little to no notice. It went from being smoky to, wow, the fire's crossed the highway and it's headed your way. But like I said, in terms of power outages, I don't know. Like, I mean, being from the north, there were a few of us that had generators, and I don't know. I mean, I think of 2015, Sass Power had taken in some huge generators to Pine House when that had happened. And I don't know, maybe that's something that they just need to have on standby closer to the north, so you're not waiting. But I mean, with that being said too, right, the fire closed Highway 155 and nobody could get through. Sass Power sat on the road there for overnight waiting to try get in and even assess the damage. So I honestly, I don't know.
We definitely topped up every fuel tank that we had. We took assessment of where the generators were and where they needed to be working, and so that we could keep them working as long as possible. We had agreements with our people that we need to break into their homes to get, try and save some of their food and move them to freezers where there was a generator, or just move freezers. Trying to prepare for that sort of thing, because that's going to happen.
Well, when you say it's going to happen, the other prediction is the El Nino is coming in for another season, and it should start kicking in August. And that's a dry, hot prediction is what they're saying. So August, still 2 months away, and we're in high fire season. So our summer ain't over. It hasn't even started. And I also mentioned Pelican Narrows, that I think it was 2015 when they had the fire in October. It was the snow that knocked it out finally. So every piece of advice and recommendation you guys are experiencing is something we all have to be prepared for and to endure. Brenda,
Barb, can I ask Barb a question?
Yeah,
first?
go ahead, Barb.
Okay, one of the things that has come up is respite care. We've had to move people with mobility issues and dementia issues into respite care, and respite care is only covered for 2 weeks if you can find a facility. But the recommendation, because especially with the people with mobility issues, if we're in a hard situation where we have to move fast, we might not be able to access transportation in time. So with these families, with individuals in that position, we've been trying to recommend that they put them in respite care until this fire season is over, because we cannot guarantee their safety. We cannot guarantee we can get the transportation in time. When you have more than one person with a mobility issue, that's 2 sets of transportation.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have 3 people that would be in that position if we had to. So that respite care for pay, the fees for that respite care being extended with this kind of climate situation that we're dealing with, like, this isn't going to be over all summer, essentially. And until everything's burned, at least. And that's an awful thought. Who do I talk to? I've reached out to NIFA and they don't have, actual respite facilities or anything. And he suggested this is more in Dr. Sobel's area, but who would you recommend?
I honestly, that sounds to me more like an SHA question. And I'm not sure where, like, your respite patients
But we
go.
have to use ours go to SHA facilities.
Yeah, see, and that's where I think that discussion might need to be had with SHA. Because I know everywhere in our area uses Alacross for respite. And that's another thing to take into consideration, right? There was days nobody could get into Alacross, so.
Well, last time we had to send one to Leask and one to North Battleford. We got one in La Loche right now. And that one can only be there for 3 days. That's the only time they have left.
Yeah. So I would say that's definitely an SHA policy. I don't know if that's something that Dr. Sobel could look into or one of the primary healthcare managers. Like Jennifer Hennecu's replacement may be a good person to discuss that with. I haven't met him yet or had him. And there's Dr. McKinney. Maybe Dr. McKinney would know.
Maybe Dr. McKinney can answer my question.
But yeah, I would divert that back to SHA since that's where our
I kind of forgot you're with
people go.
The other one.
The other one, yeah.
Welcome, Dr.
Hi.
McKinney.
Sorry, I'm so late. I was quadruple booked at this time, if you can believe it.
No, we're recovering from the evacuations. We're hearing from Buffalo and English River and all the experiences they had up there. But kind of the closing question was on the respite care.
Right.
There is a 2-week window, and if the facility is open, but is there anything more organized that should be coordinated between agencies on this?
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. I think it is an important one to bring up for sure, because, with all the stress and anxiety, I think it's absolutely critical that be done, but I haven't heard of a thing. The other thing, of course, right now is that there is an interim executive director. So as you know, Jennifer's left. So Chad Sayer, I think is the right name, who is in the position. He was, I think he might even still be up in the Northwest right now, just to kind of get a sense of what's going on. But yeah, I think, everybody's just scrambling with all that's been going on, and I don't think they have got anything planned, is my understanding.
No, they don't.
I was
I can
going
tell
to
you right now.
Yeah, and I was going to throw out there too, I've mentioned before, we have the Strongest Families Institute. It's not the same thing by a long shot, but they kind of get help with coping techniques around, things like anxiety, stress, that kind of stuff. So, it's not that won't provide any respite care, and it's not counseling or anything. It's just kind of the tools part of how to manage with stuff. But there's that's readily available at any time for anybody. So if you just, we have information at any of the clinics. So you don't need to be referred. You can just actually phone in yourself and self-refer. I'll see if I can get that sent out to you guys actually. And, but yeah, there's nothing right now that's really firmly set up at all, which is really very frustrating. And that Strongest Families Institute, just as a sideline, I'm kind of jumping an announcement, but the Jim Patterson's Children's Hospital Foundation will be supporting that for all those families that are on child psychiatry lists. But this is for adults and kids alike. It's not just for kids. So there is going to be more widespread access, for people for sure. So I think that's a good testament that it works. It's helpful anyways. It's not, it doesn't solve everything. Like I said, doesn't mean you're getting treatment. Like it's not a treatment, but it just sort of helps with those kind of pieces. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of pieces. Like I just found with this whole last evacuation, it really highlights how much changeover there's been since 2015, and that I don't think there's corporate memory around a lot of these different pieces. And so you guys are the corporate memory, and with that, and I think things are just in a really, how do I want to put this? They're just busy right now, still trying to cope with the COVID and all these other pieces. It seems short staffed everywhere, and certainly at the senior leadership area. So I just really feel these pieces are falling between the cracks. So I think you kind of have to be a squeaky wheel to try to get things going, is the way I would put it. Yeah.
Oh, I'm being that.
Yeah.
I'm definitely being that. Yeah, the issue was like, I don't know if you've heard what I was saying before you, just as you jumped on.
No, I
But
didn't. actually.
respiratory care only covers 2 weeks, and
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly move out in a hurry up situation because I have 3 people with mobility issues,
Yeah.
need special transport,
Yeah.
and I'm recommending the families go to respite care for the rest of the fire season.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's like, who's going to pay for that?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
you know, they are actual evacuees from
Yeah.
their community because of
Yeah.
this, but
Yeah.
unless we just bill them.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like it is really ridiculous. Like there just hasn't been a lot of thought around these pieces. And I don't know, like I said, it doesn't seem like there's anybody to go to for some of these things either right now. So yeah, it's a little challenging, that's for sure.
Well,
Well,
maybe public again.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't.
We kind
It's
of had to
awful.
threaten to go public to get some things done on this last.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, Daryl Wright warned them I might go public if they didn't start now.
It kind
We
of
got
reminds
action.
me though of The Simpsons. There was an episode where Marge and Homer go for marriage counseling, and so they start at a certain time, and Marge didn't want to talk too much about stuff, but they finally encouraged her. So she ended up talking till like 2 a.m, to the point where her voice was rasped, and she goes, "And one more thing." And so I was like, so when you get your time, you might have a lot. Hopefully it won't be quite like that.
Oh yeah, it will. It's getting there. Even today, having a session right now.
Yeah. I kind of feel like maybe I have that list myself, but that's okay. Not necessarily with SHA, but just with all kinds of different things going on. But it's like, oh my gosh.
I was just sharing a recap of last week's meeting we had with Dr.
Yeah.
Sobel, and one of the eye openers that I heard was the deaths compared from last year to this
Yes.
year.
Yes.
Maybe you just want to share that because it kind of woke me up a bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of what they call unexplained deaths. And so out of that, they take out of their things like overdoses, or like when there's heat waves, we could anticipate a certain amount of deaths from that. But there's a massive amount, like I can't even remember what the percentage is, like, like I think something like 3,000 extra deaths that are not accounted for. So the thought is, the only thing that's been different is this whole COVID thing. And we do know that there are effects that are not necessarily the immediate infection, but the after effects, as well as I've said for quite some time. We do know it's not a respiratory bug. It's actually what they call an endothelial. It attacks the endothelium, which is the lining of blood vessels. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of things like in the brain, in the pancreas, and the GI tract, and, all over the place. And blood clots are part of that. So when you see people dying of sudden heart attack, it isn't necessarily related to cardiovascular disease. Sometimes it's related to COVID. But when you're seeing like the numbers that we're seeing, it's massive. Like it is quite substantial. And I can't remember what the number was that he quoted last week. But like I said, when you see the graphs and the numbers, it's a stupid amount. Like there's been maybe about, I think so far around 2,000 reported deaths since 2020, since the start of COVID, but there's well over 3,000 deaths that are not accounted for. And this is true in other parts of the world as well. And when they dig into it, it is usually COVID related. So anyways, you know, like I don't think they've done testing on absolutely everybody, of course, related to that, but we are starting to see that. Like I have a lady that I know that works at the university, and she's healthy, knows, exercises, you know, relatively young, like definitely under 60. I think she's in her late 40s. You know, eats well, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, doesn't, you know, no diabetes, and she just had a stroke. I mean, it was lucky that they caught it early, so they were able to treat. So I don't think she's going to have a huge amount of ongoing damage, but we're starting to see that. I know of personally a couple of people that have had that. Heart attacks are more common in younger people, blood clots, all those types of things too. So, but it is staggering how much is out there, for sure.
What about in children?
Well, yeah, and the other thing that recent thing that I've read about was that so we here in Saskatchewan, the numbers seem to be anywhere between 16 to 25% of people who have COVID will have these long-term effects, or long haul effects, they call them. However, we still don't know, like it seems more and more, it's like something like hepatitis or HIV, where you get the immediate infection, but then there's other things later on. So, and it doesn't seem to be related to how badly you were infected in the first place. But of course, the more often you get the infection, the more likely it is you will get some of these other things. So for kids, they determine the number, and this was across Canada, I believe, is around 16% for more of the long haul. But as we're learning, it's hard to say, is long haul like ongoing symptoms from when you first get it, or is it some of these after effects? So, you know, I think we're kind of changing the terminology as we learn a little bit more, but I kind of like, keep saying there's the acute infection, so that's the immediate part, and then there's this other part that comes later on. And some of these things like diabetes, that happens a year later. But it's with kids, they've done studies on the brains, and they can see that it is changing their brains. And one of the things that happens, like when you get mono and, you know, from the throat, one of the things that happens is that virus causes cells to kind of fuse together and become one big giant cell. They're seeing that same thing in the brains. So there's changes that are happening for sure.
Yeah.
Scary.
I knew they had to hear it from you.
No, it is scary. It really is. Like, you know, you don't want to read too much, because sometimes after a while you're like, oh my God. But I do still wear my mask, and now I'm wearing it out as well, because with the forest fires, those little small particles, like the N95s actually help to clean that. And I've got a HEPA filter in my car, so I don't get that when I'm breathing and driving. And I've got the blue, I bought the Blue Airs. I think you guys got the same actually. For the house, like I've got them all over, because you want to make sure you're cleaning out everything. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I really believe the air quality is becoming more and more important, or we're recognizing it. It's always been important, but we never really thought about it. But yeah, it's really awful. And I think the other thing that I learned too, in terms of nature just recently, was, you know, because with a lot of our Indigenous people, we tend to leave the land in its natural state. We don't do a lot of manipulation to it. So one of the things from the Department of Agriculture is they've done sort of photographic studies around First Nations communities or Métis communities. And often they find, particularly, it's easier to pick out the First Nations communities, but there's a lot more green there. And there's a lot more of, or a lot less of environmental damage, because they've left things in a much more natural state. And so now there is this, like, we do need to do this. Like even farming is damaging to the earth, because even though those plants might trap carbon, because it's all tilled up and manipulated, it actually releases a lot more carbon to the air. So this kind of fallacy around, oh, it's only the cows producing methane and all this. No, it's you know, think of the big farm equipment and all the plants and the soil that's being tilled. And then if you think of mining and how far down they're going, and so there's a lot of damage happening for sure. And, you know, when you look at all the stuff that's going to clean this, it's the plants and stuff. I don't know how that's going to work actually, but in the meantime, we need to kind of protect ourselves. But yeah, those little particles from smoke will stay in your lungs forever, is what I'm told. Now, they won't protect from gases, like if you're inhaling some kind of gas, like if you're close to a fire, but it will help with those small particles for sure.
I was wearing mine while I was planting.
Yeah, yeah. I know it's
I was
crazy.
out there for 2 hours.
Yeah.
I was out there for 2 hours in the smoke
Yeah,
planting the last couple of days.
Yeah.
It helped.
yeah. I always remember I went to Japan a couple times, but there are people that wear masks there, or had to wear masks long before COVID. And I always thought, oh, it's so awful that you'd live in a place where you have to wear masks. And I thought, we're so lucky in our north. We've got
Yeah.
this beautiful, pristine area. We're so lucky. And it's like, oh my God, here we are. Like, it's just that changed really quick. Yeah.
No, those water levels are dangerously low. Beaver
Yeah.
Rivers, it hasn't gone up yet. Buffalo, all across, all these lakes are all low. And the
Yeah.
muskegs, the water level is low, so that's why the bogs are
even-
burning. And those flare-ups, it's the bogs that are staying long before after the firefighters are gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they were saying too, like they have to run their pumps and hoses from so far away because so many of the creeks and stuff are dry.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, like I think we're in for a really bumpy ride here. I don't know, how, and even with the fires, it's so early, it's still not officially summer yet. I don't know what July is going to look like, but I worry about that too. But yeah, and then how many people, like, they just get back and then you're back out again, and it's this back and forth thing is so traumatizing to people for sure. Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
very,
that's what Candace was saying. It's the forest fires are one thing, but those human fires, those flare-ups of emotions,
Yeah.
it's hard. You need backup to these volunteers and workers that are making it happen. So
Yeah.
like we've exhausted whole teams, it's
Yeah.
just, it's, we've actually had to turn towards the end of the last evacuation that lasted 3 weeks. We had to turn to community volunteers who were evacuees to assist.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too. I was just listening to some stuff around because the majority of firefighters in Canada are volunteer, but the number has gone down like substantially over the last few years. And so, and we don't have, like, as we've talked before, we don't have those jumpers. We don't have those experts that we used to have. And so we don't even have the people like trained that we need, I think, to do some of this. But yeah, and then I've heard too, like in Isle just over the weekend, I think it was, there was 2 elders, I believe, that passed away too. So you wonder, like, with all the regular stuff that happens too, it just really, everything just sort of makes it culminate in a way that's so difficult for everybody, for sure.
I think there's been some dialogue nationally to have a national wildfire response team ready and equipment. So that kind of
Yeah,
welcoming, it'd be nice. Then that interjurisdictional divide will be blurred.
Yeah. Yeah.
But preparedness, the equipment and the training, that's what's required. And it would help a lot of our young people get off the idle time that they're having in our communities. And, it's careers for these people. So I look forward to that type of intervention at the federal level, aside from what Mo is trying to do it, creating a public agency here, arm's length from ministries and
Well, that was
centralizing everything. It just doesn't work. The central approach doesn't work.
No.
that's like, when I said, we were threatening to make me go public. That's the aim. We had the representative emergency operations from ISC. We had NEFA, we had MLTC, and all of our communities telling SPSA, like, we can get more equipment if you just say you do not have enough resources.
Yeah.
All you have to do is say it, and we can start getting it.
Wow.
It might take a while to get, but they won't say it.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like Michelle Ring from ISK straight out asked him, when are you going to call in for federal assistance? Because you obviously don't have the resources to deal with these many fires in this many communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they won't.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And I know even with health, there's a lot of concern. I mean, they received a huge amount of money. And even from the federal side and in confidence, talking to some of the people there, they said the same thing. We worry that none of this is actually going to get to on the ground, like where it's needed.
Right.
We're just and it seems so terrible to be caught in a political situation that somehow you can't get the help when you need it. It's just, I think it's really ridiculous.
Or even the admittance that you can't do enough.
Well, geez, I know it's
Then they
crazy.
announce he's the most popular premier in the gun. That blew my mind.
I'm not saying anything, but I just want to get my Nerf gun and start shooting at a picture or something. It would make me feel better.
Well, I want to call Chris on here to intervene. Chris, just on your perspective, the forest fires are, the preparedness has been as much as we can for over the years, and 2015 as an example of what's before. But I don't know if you're still on, Chris, but maybe if you'll weigh in on a bit of your suggestions or what you're observing.
Well, I was going to move to Hawaii, but my daughter tells me that they have a volcano over there, and everything from the volcano is coming across the island. So I'm not sure that you're going to move anywhere. But as you listen to whatever you're talking about, and as I've kind of wanted, we've got to come to the reality that you're going to have to be personally prepared. And unless that kind of message goes out, if you think there's somebody going to come and save you, forget it. It's just not going to happen. I think that's one of the messages that we could be putting out, is the idea that we need to teach people emergency preparedness. Because you say, oh, the government should get this air purifier, or the problem we have with the agencies around us is who's responsible. You know what I mean? And that's the big issue. We need for the needs of people, and all you're doing is, it's like that game we used to play, hot potato, you know what I mean? Throw it around. Well, that's what's happening. And then you get into the issue, even if you could find somebody to be responsible, then it's who is included and not included. You know what I mean? As we start to look at this whole access question, there's a real problem there, because we don't collect information, like you were saying on respite, people needing transportation or people having mobility issues. We don't have that information, so that when it comes down to it, I mean, and the people that are involved in it, you never know. They tell us a report. We'll probably get a report on the loss of cabins, the loss of damage, everything, sometime in the spring. You know what I mean? It's not there. And we do not have even a good understanding of what's existing right now. I mean, we know lots of people out there that are available to be trained as firefighters, things like this, but we don't even have a good idea of what resources we have in our communities, because we think somebody else is doing it. So as I listen, what I see is the whole question that people are going to have to get back to. Let's pretend there's nobody out there going to help us, because in reality, if I don't have some sort of ability to have a generator, I don't have some ability to actually build a fire guard around my house and things like this, I may or may not get that support. And I've been thinking about that message of saying that, in health, we say that, we'll depend on the health clinic, or we'll depend on the NGOs, the Red Cross, or, what I mean, somebody out there that'll come and help us. But I've met with these organizations, and they're saying, we got no funding, we're stretched. And now people are coming to us to ask for something else. We can't even get volunteers in the Red Cross. And as you were thinking about this whole idea, Rick, of training people, all you got to do is look a little bit beyond things. The Canadian government cannot even get people to join the RCMP. They can't get people to join the military. These are paid positions. And so maybe it's time we start taking things upon ourselves, going meet with the minister of that's over the military and saying, we want to create in the northwest part of the province people that can actually provide safety, because it's just a very simple request. All I want to do is keep safe. There's so many things out there. I want to be safe when it comes down to my health. I want to be safe when it comes down to whether I got alcohol and drugs in my community or gangs. All I want is to be safe. And so I think the message is there. And what's disappointing is the people that we think have that responsibility. You know what I mean? Candace says, well, NITA is stopping to hold meetings. Well, the local municipalities haven't been on this call or anything like this for weeks. And so as you're beginning to look at, nobody can tag the government because the government they're playing hide and seek right now. And the only time you hear about them is when they're making an announcement of a good thing. I mean, nobody's taking responsibility for health. The COVID, as we've talked about it, you can't even get somebody to do a fire guard. I mean, because there's somebody there that says, well, if you burn this area or you're going to do this, you know, to back burn or whatever you do, they say, oh, no, you got to have a permit. And you say, well, from who? And then you start everybody handing it off. So my message is something that I've said before. It's time to actually put out the message. And I think you've got the radio there, Rick, with your Treaty 10 work and everything like this. The opportunity of just putting out to people and saying, here, I'm now interviewing Veronica, and what she's telling us about is COVID is not gone. The after effects are still there. There's still 3,000 unexplained deaths. There's still after effects. They're starting to say, hey, it's not a respiratory disease, it's something in the lining, and that's why it affects all your organs. And we're finding it in 16% children. And just informing the people to say, oh, we can expect Saskatchewan Health if they could find staff to do something, but they can't even get managers. And the reason they can't get managers is because once you work for Saskatchewan Health, you know, the board does not run Saskatchewan Health. It's Saskatchewan Health that does, and Saskatchewan Health Department is run by the cabinet. And the only thing they're interested in is money. They want to cut back. They're centralizing everything. So I think, to sum up, if I could, is the idea, you start looking at being personally prepared. You start looking at those agencies that will help individuals and families. If you expect somebody to come and take one of your elderly people into safety, forget it. I mean, we might be able to be there, we might not. And so you've got to start looking at personal safety with food, personal safety with power, personal safety, you know, those areas that we used to do. I mean, imagine it was 100 years ago and you're out in the bush. If you didn't have that knowledge to keep yourself personally safe, forget it. I mean, and right now we've depended on these outside agencies since the 40s. And these outside agencies are, first of all, they're not aligned, they're not coordinated. The second problem, they don't have no reporting system. They even report what the problem is, the needs are. So anyway, I could go on for the rest of the afternoon, Rick, but I think you got the communications tool. I'm helping you out with getting some interviews and things like this. We just need to do some more of that, put it out on the radio stations, because even our municipal governments are not even, that we're depending on the chiefs, and the band chiefs are saying, hey, we're expecting the Red Cross to jump in. The Red Cross doesn't have volunteers either. So that's
Yeah,
my
they're very short-staffed. Oh, tremendously.
Yeah, I think that was what you're talking about again is on the outset of this pandemic preparedness, we wanted to build a legacy for other emergencies. And I think engaging with the federal government is it leads us back to that trail again. I think the emergency preparedness, public safety, they're all kind of meshing together now. It's, you know, it's not only health safety, it's violence safety, it's air quality safety, it's health services safety, transportation safety, food safety. And it was just so beautiful, you know, seeing our communities work together, you know, from Turner Lake telling us about the food availability, you know, English River making contact with the data and sharing it with all our communities. I think that's where we need to go. I think that's the interagency, and our leaders, our mayors have to meet with our chiefs. That political divide between it doesn't exist. Our families are interrelated, our communities are intertwined. And I think we ought to engage the federal government. I think that's where we got to start calling. If as Candace is saying, Indigenous Service Canada has some of these similar concerns that we had, I think you know, we could give them credence. You know, they'll have ammunition to fight their battles at their level. So I think I will reach out to them as well. You talked about Michelle Ring and also the Director General. I think it's Rob Harvey still in place there. So maybe I reach out to them and maybe invite them into our calls on this, because these are all impacting all our communities simultaneously, and the situations are similar. It's that preparedness and the safety is utmost.
And you're bang on, Chris, too, with the, it's not the health people are not running Saskatchewan Health Authority. The boards are not running that. It is a direct line, like you said, to the cabinet. That's why some of these people have left, because they can't keep doing this. And that's health. But I mean, I'm sure the same is going on elsewhere.
What I'd suggest, Rick, is something not to call in these people that are part of the status quo. You call in Rod Harvey. All he does is he looks up to his assistant deputy minister and the deputy minister for his marching orders. And he'll be nice to you and you'll say, oh, very good. We'll try to do something. I think what we need to do as a group, even 5 or 6 of us, is contact the minister's office of the military and saying, we want to create 1,000 cadets, 1,000 whatever on the Northwest side. We've got 1,000 students. We want to actually set those up so that they could be trained. And we're going to do them in firefighting. And when he says, well, I'm not sure, then we'll phone up the Prime Minister's office and we'll say, we'd like to talk to the Prime Minister if we could, because we've got connections that we can do that. And if we can't get to the Prime Minister, Rick, maybe we'll phone up the opposition and we'll say, Mr. Singh, we want you here to prepare, help us to have the military set up a little squadron of 1,000 people. There's not, we've looked at 2,000 or 5,000 on the Northwest side, but we'd like to start off with 1,000. And of those people, we want to be trained as firefighters. We want them to be trained as health workers. We want them to be trained as security people. We want them, and just go there and just say, look, this is what we want. And then we'll phone up somebody at the Toronto Star. And then we will phone up somebody at the CBC and saying, we put this forward to people. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go out to all the leaders, the chiefs, and say, would you sign a letter of support for us? Would you sign Métis Nation to sign a letter of support? Because they don't take leadership. So maybe they can give us a support letter kind of thing. So that's the type of thing I'm not, I've been to the route of finding people that are in positions, but they can't help. I mean, I listened to Jennifer from SHE. She got to the point where she said, I'll liaise on this. It's not the people. And I'll just close with this. It's the design of the system. The system's not designed for us to get an answer that we need.
Great
And
stuff.
Rick, I'll support you if you want to run for election.
Again,
I didn't want to get too political here. I'm a recovering politician, I always like saying, so.
I
But
don't blame
Brenda,
you.
I wanted to bring Brenda in here just to, and community preparedness, I guess, and training. Is that something that you see or experienced or would wish for? Small village of Green Lake, we all know, but the willingness to help, from the community side, are we on the right track is to prepare our communities in this way and create opportunities for our young people?
Yes, definitely. I would say Green Lake would be in need of a community preparedness group or unit. I know we have I think these continue to struggle with a fire department here, so we're always requesting Meadow Lake Fire attend. But along the lines of community preparedness, especially with the forest fires being so close, it would definitely be of assistance. Just a note on the RCMP recruiting. I know that's been mentioned. Along with the military, the RCMP recruiting is in dire straits as well. For some reason, our young people do not see our organization, the military, healthcare, etc., as a viable career path. Right now, I know Saskatchewan and F Division recruiting is working hard to work with all the communities in the area. I've been working closely with the recruiting unit in Saskatoon as well as Regina, both the Indigenous group and the non-Indigenous, just spreading the word out there. Any young people who are interested, as long as you're 19 years of age, you can apply and get in. If you're 18, you can apply, and then once you turn 19, you can hopefully get selected for depot. We also have an Indigenous troop, and I think I may have mentioned it last time. They were hoping to have about 20 candidates, and they only had one show up for training that morning. So if you do know of some young strong-willed individuals who have interested in our career path, send them my way, give them my email. Like I mentioned, I'll be transferring to Loon Lake in about 2 weeks. I will be here next week, but they can definitely reach out and contact me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think all this topic we had talked about, like a boot camp for a lot of our young people up here. Sometimes they need pardons to get onto these career paths, but also some of them are dealing with addictions or other, and it's like a boot camp. You just, before you enter the career trail, that we need to get you ship shape. And I think that's where we're talking about. I think if we can talk to the minister, I know the military budgets are booming right now because of the situation in the world. But if there's any way we can help, maybe from there to recruiting to the RCMP and military could be career paths for some of these people. But on the outset, we need them for this emergency response preparedness in our own backyard, in our own families. So if we can engage them somehow and create an orderly structure, it might be from that military side, because the north is straddled with this big bombing range, the Primrose bombing range, and all the economic activities on the Alberta side. So maybe if we can develop something, maybe a helicopter wing I had also mentioned, that maybe on this side of our bombing range, a helicopter wing could be developed where people could train to be helicopter pilots and mechanics and initial response crew. Well, we'll take Chris's advice and maybe we'll knock on the federal cabinet doors. Candace, are you willing?
To knock on doors?
Yes.
Politicians? The only one I
No,
trusted was
no.
you.
I like the idea of the cadets part too. Like my son is in cadets. I was in the Navy 100 years ago as well too. And I think anytime you can get that kind of training, it helps with the idea of discipline and stuff. And it's changed dramatically now. Like it's not about yelling and screaming and all that kind of stuff. It's more about building skills, leadership, all those different things. It's actually really impressive what they do. So I think it would be great if we could get our youth involved with that and actually give them meaning and purpose, like in terms of the jobs that are available to them. There's education opportunities, like there's just so many different things that they can do for sure.
I would
Yes.
say, Rick, I will advocate for whatever is absolutely necessary to get some of these people off their butts, doing something purposeful and being more of a solution than having to babysit them.
Yes. No, I hear
The
you.
thing-
See that from the communities as well. And that's,
And I agree, life's gotten way too easy for especially our youth. And, you know, we've been trying now for years to get some kind of a cadet group going. We talked to the RCMP about bringing in their cadet corps. And again, it's a challenge.
them to
It's
go.
gonna be, it's getting them to show up. And trying to get them there. We've gone so far as to drive around and pick up kids and say, let's go, we're going to a program. But yeah, once they get into that, they kind of shy away. But yeah, I agree. I think that, like, you know, that type of structure, like Rick said, it's going to help us with emergency preparedness in the north, but that kind of structure is also going to help us with all of the public safety issues that we have in the north. You know, Beauval just recently had a shooting that the victim was a Buffalo boy and he was shot by Lacrosse boys. And like I said, these are all that age group that should be out there with a shovel, hauling hoses and putting out hot spots, not running around shooting each other.
you're exactly right.
There's one other bright side. We're now dealing with grade 8s to get them into health programs. So we start at the grade 8 level and we track them grade 9, 10, 11, and 12 with guarantees of jobs after 4 months of training after grade 12. And we're trying to do this, and we're doing it with continuing care nurses. We're doing it with medical office assistants. We're dealing with people that actually work, but we have reached into the grade 8s to actually do this. We're not trying to wait until somebody drops out of school and get them back in. No, we're just trying to get them at grade 8, and that's, you know, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. That's cadets age. So anyway, that's my
Yes,
call.
all kinds of things, like, you know, maybe the word cadets. Like some people are shying away from the idea of military, the idea of policing. And you're seeing that. But if they see it as a means, and maybe not call it by those names, of having purposeful roles in their communities, having purposeful means of making a living, as you know, because we encourage them when they're young to have goals and dreams. And then they get disillusioned very quickly as soon as their eyes open to the world around them. And so if we can do something like that, like in all kinds of areas, not just health, that would be really good.
Well,
Thanks.
if there's any other questions for anybody, I think this topic is just bang on. You guys are This is what I wanted to hear.
that's
Our communities need to
Just not
prepare.
done.
It's just going to get worse. But in closing, can I ask, Barb, would you close us with a prayer?
Oh my goodness, Rick.